What are you looking at, motherfucker?
I'm Mr. Meeseeks! Look at me!
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is episode number 28 of the Baseball and Beer Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. I am your host. My name is Brendan Bowes, and as always, the job of this podcast is to lead you through three of my favorite things in the world. Baseball and beer, obviously, but since baseball is pretty much out of season right now, I'm turning the focus on football. But it's tough to rename the whole brand as beer and baseball and football, so trying to fit that in as much as I can within the podcast. So again, appreciate you listening in as we, like I said before, start episode number 28. All right, you know the drill at this point, so I'm going to get through it quickly. There are several different ways to reach out to me if you have any questions, concerns regarding the podcast. Firstly, on Twitter, it is at BaseballBeerPod. Facebook group is the same thing, facebook.com/baseballbeerpod. If you wanted to join the group, that's how you do it. If you want to send me an email, it is baseballbeerpodcast@gmail.com. Finally, if you want to find the website in which these podcasts get posted before you can find them on iTunes and Stitcher, it is baseballandbeerpodcast.blogspot.com. And I kind of already gave that away, but if you want to subscribe to the Baseball and Beer Podcast, they can be found at both iTunes and Stitcher, whatever one you prefer. Obviously, iTunes is Apple-based products or whatever, and Stitcher is for any other products that you have, even Apple products. So those are the ways you can reach out to me or find the podcast. Whichever way you're listening to this is probably the way you continue to listen to it. Just giving you the options.
Beer is good, beer is good, beer is good, and stop.
All right, so this past weekend, had the pleasure of going down to Connecticut, Oxford specifically, and doing a tour of OEC Brewery. I know we've talked about that before, or talked about OEC Brewery before. They're a brewery that focuses more on the sour beers, I don't want to say fruiting beers because that just sounds wrong, but more barrel aging, sweetening through barrel aging and that sort of thing. So it's a whole different approach than your traditional breweries or craft breweries. So it's a tour that they only offer a couple of times per year. So it was definitely worth looking into and definitely taking a tour. They pretty much said outright that it was going to take at least 3 hours to get through the entire tour, which is interesting considering if you've ever taken a tour through any sort of craft brewery, it's an hour tops. So imagine what another 2 hours would be like. But the fact of the matter is these guys have a very impressive layout. Their facility is top-notch for being a craft brewery that's only been open a couple of years, but they've put a lot of focus and a lot of time and energy into making a quality product, so more power to them. If you want to talk about experimenting with every aspect of brewing, then you definitely should check these guys out. They have cement fermenters, they have ceramic fermenters, they have cement mash tuns. It's really tough to, well, it's pretty easy to put into words, but the amount of uniqueness that they have is pretty crazy. Like I said, they like to focus on sour beers and barrel aging. So, needless to say, they have a boatload of barrels. And, you know, one of the things that they like to hang their hat on is the fact that they don't really try to recreate beers the same way every time. So to put it in, I make an example. I'm just gonna use the first thing that pops into my head. Sam Adams regular Boston Lager. The batch, if you buy a 6-pack today versus a 6-pack that you're gonna buy, next March, it's gonna taste the same, relatively close to the same. Whereas these guys, if you buy, a beer from them now, and they bring out the same beer a year or two from now, it's going to be different, regardless of the fact that it has the same name. But it's going to be a different batch. The barrels are going to be the same. They may not be the same. They do open fermentation, so nothing is done the same is really the best way to explain it, and it's pretty fantastic. Our tour was basically going from barn to room, and just seeing all these barrels, different barrels, that are holding different base beers for different length of time. And, it's someone's job to go around and sample these things, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, to see where they stand. And they really don't have any problems. Just if a barrel isn't tasting what they thought it was going to be, they have no problem just dumping it, trying it again. That takes a lot of balls. And especially for a brewery that, I guess a microbrewery, that's a lot of money that you're almost literally flushing down the toilet. But, they want the beer that they want, and they're a brewery that's in high demand, so, they get to do what they want. Earlier in the day, they were releasing an experimentalist. I think that's the correct pronunciation. A raspberry experimentalist. Needless to say, people were waiting in line for that beer come 6:30 that morning. There's a Facebook group that we follow that we're posting updates, and by the time the doors opened at 11:30, there was a couple hundred people long, which was impressive. Thankfully, our tour didn't start until 2:30, so the line was real short by the time we got there. And, to waste time, we went to Black Hog, which was a little bit further down the road in Oxford, but, they were offering a barley wine. It's a brewery that lets you sit down, have some beers, so killed some time there before we went off to OEC. All right, so along with the tour, along with the tour of the brewery, they gave us a couple of other freebies. They are in the process of starting their own bakery within the brewery, so we got to sample some interesting made bread that they're going to be introducing to the bakery. And the bread is going to be made from the spent grains and the wort that they used to make the beer. So they're trying to basically do full circle with their facilities. But along with the free bread, we got a free pint glass or free glassware, type of glass that I don't have yet. So it was interesting to be able to accept that into my glass collection. And obviously, we got some free beverages, pulled samples from some of the barrels, as well as getting a free pint of our selection, or whatever was available at the tasting room before the tour. So, needless to say, they did treat us very well. The tour actually ended up being a little over 3 hours. I think it was closer to 3.5. But our tour guide was very into the tour. He was very knowledgeable, and he certainly tried to answer as many questions as we could throw at him. So thank you, OEC, for the good fun time. And actually, we were already talking about seeing if we could possibly do the tour the next time you guys offer it. So thanks again.
Hi, I'm Mr. Booby Buyer. I'll buy those boobies for 25 schmeckles.
All right, the other news in the beer side of things is I did find a craft beer shop here in Framingham. It's one that recently opened, probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago. But I went in earlier this week, talked with the guy who runs it, and explained to him, that I'm a stout guy, and gave me a couple of different stouts that I've never had before. So just wanted to run everything down real quick and give my thoughts on the beers that he recommended. The first one is a local, well, I don't want to say local, it's in New Hampshire, I believe Dover, New Hampshire, Dover Dairy, from brewery Kelsen Brewing Company. It's called Vendel Imperial Stout. It's obviously an imperial stout that has a lot of chocolate and a lot of coffee in it. It was probably my favorite out of the bunch. The chocolate and the coffee pushed through, the stout in not a harsh way, in a very good, at least for me, a good appreciative way. But yeah, I am impressed with Kelsen Brewing Company, and I hope that going forward I could try some more of their beer because they've got a new customer with the Vendel Stout. The second beer is from Left Hand Brewing Company over in Colorado. I am familiar with Left Hand Brewing before I had this beer. Don't think I had anything from them so far. Whereas with Kelsen Brewing, I didn't know them before I purchased the Vendel Imperial Stout, but getting too far ahead of myself. From Left Hand, I had the Bittersweet Imperial Coffee Milk Stout, and again, it was really good. It's very sweet for a stout, but it still had the very deep and dark texture that you would expect, followed with the sweet taste of the milk stout. I wouldn't call it bittersweet. I guess the aftertaste was bitter, but I would say it was more sweet than anything. But again, that's what I prefer. I prefer this, chocolate, coffee, milk stouts that are sweet and that sort of thing. So can't really complain. The Vendel Imperial Stout was number 1, but this was a close number 2. The third and final beer that I had was a beer from a brewery called Moa Brewing Company, way, way, way over in New Zealand. This was an imperial stout that was aged in Pinot Noir barrels, the wine. I was very interested in that fact because it just sounds interesting. Sounds like it would bring a nice, heavy but sweet, smoky taste to it. So I was curious as to what it would actually taste like. And apparently it's not my thing. It has nothing to do with the beer itself. The beer was great, but the being aged in Pinot Noir, I can't pronounce wines, Pinot Noir barrel just didn't do anything for me. I guess after introducing myself to 2 very sweet imperial stouts, that this one just, I don't want to call it a barley wine because I like barley wine, but it just knocked it. It's just the type of beer just didn't sit well with me. It wasn't my thing, but I would suggest people who are curious to give it a shot because you may like it. It's me. I just didn't like it. The style just didn't suit me.
Another block kick. Everybody blames me, but it was the left guard who didn't pick up his man. Oh, I can't be.
All right, so the big news out of Raiders camp is that Aldon Smith, the free agent signing that the Raiders picked up a week or 2 into the season, finally been suspended by the NFL for a full year, which was expected. Everyone knew it was coming. I guess everyone thought that the suspension was going to be handed down in October or something, and that the Raiders were only going to get 2 or 3 games out of Aldon Smith before he was gone. But as much of a dirtbag that he is, the fact that the Raiders got 10 games out of him is nice. Preferably would have liked to see more wins come out of it, but the fact that the defense or the secondary is one of the worst that I've seen in a long time doesn't really matter. It's something, as I've said before, that our secondary sucks, so it's nice that the Raiders have salary cap and draft picks that they can focus on the secondary, but still would have been nice to have Aldon Smith for the entire year. But, still have Khalil Mack. Mario Edwards Jr. has been picking up the pace, so our defensive ends are still solid. We're still in good position on the front seven, so can't really complain about that. But, it's news. Aldon Smith was a big part, and, he got a suspension a month and a half after the fact that most people thought he was. So I guess to quickly recap, Aldon Smith, the domestic disputes, DUIs, he even got drunk and ran around San Francisco's airport saying that he had a bomb. So he's not all there. Hopefully he gets better. Didn't seem like he was having any issues while on the Raiders, but who knows? Nothing that's been reported. So he's a pretty scummy guy. Hopefully he gets better. Hopefully he spends another year as a Raider, and hopefully we can take over. But that said, Raiders lost again to Minnesota this past week. This time they allowed Adrian Peterson to run for over 200 yards, especially an 80-yard touchdown run towards the end of the game that pretty much sealed the deal for them. Can't really blame the secondary on that. I mean, they played part of it, but, whereas the pass, if a quarterback gets 300, 400 yards, that's something you can look at the secondary in. But when a running back, goes for 200 yards, that's pretty much everyone. So that was a big reason. Derek Carr threw for over 300 yards again, but a lot of it was garbage time, so kind of hard to say if that was, him being good or not. Anyway, let's move past that. This week, the Raiders are heading to Detroit to play the Lions. A team that they don't play very often, obviously, since they're the NFC. Lions aren't good. I'm saying that the Raiders are going to win confidently, but there's always a but being a Raiders fan. Wouldn't surprise me if the Raiders blow chunks. So hopefully this offense gets back to its high-octane roots and, drops another 30 or 40 points on this Lions secondary. Tonight's NFL game, only on the NFL Network, as the NFL Network wants to screw everyone else. But I think they're the ones getting screwed here, as the 2-7 Tennessee Titans playing the AFC South rivals, the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are 3-6. So the AFC South is pretty interesting. Houston just took over the lead for that division this past week, vaulting over the awful Colts team. Even though they have the same record, they're both 4-5. But you know how it is with the NFL. Only 16 games everyone plays, so to determine who gets who gets the number one spot. They have all these, things that they go through. But if the season were to end right now, Houston would be the AFC South winners. So very interesting. Also, the other thing of note is the Bengals lost on Monday night, so we only have one undefeated team, and that, of course, is the New England Patriots. After having a really intense, really fun game against the New York Giants this past week, they are playing Monday night against the Bills. I know I have a couple of Bills friends who are listening, so I hope you guys win.
My brothers, nothing will be accomplished by shedding Meeseek's blood.
Oh, also, everyone's favorite polarizing quarterback, Tony Romo, should be coming back this week. He's been out for probably the entire season with an injury. Well, yeah, not probably. He has been out the entire season with an injury. Or no, he played the first two games. Dallas has gone 0-7 since he's gotten injured, and now he's coming back for the first time since then. So, interesting to note, he feels that Dallas can still win the NFC East, or at least still make the playoffs, but there's very little room for error. So, he still has a brain full of farts. That's good to know. Nothing's changed there. Personally, I think Romo's a fine quarterback. I think he gets shit on a little bit too much, mostly because of that silly play from like 7 years ago where he muffed a field goal hold and cost his team the playoff game. But it's neither here nor there. Just Tony Romo's back. Everyone, ready to party, as blood will be drawn now in the NFC East.
Single, double, triple, home run. For the celebration, I'll shoot my gun.
All right, so all the games have been played in baseball, so we're not getting any more new baseball for 4 months-ish. But like I said last week, this week is when, they start announcing the award winners for both American League and National League. So far, they've done Manager of the Year, they've done Rookie of the Year, and they've done Cy Young of the Year. So today is when they announce, MVP for both American League and National League. Unfortunately, that was the one I really wanted to talk about, but I didn't want to push this recording this podcast back any further, so can only discuss what's happened so far. All right, so in the American League, Jeff Bannister won Manager of the Year. Jeff Bannister is the manager of the Rangers. Well-deserved, really. I mean, the Rangers were kind of struggling for most of the year and then suddenly surged towards the end when it mattered the most and were able to make the playoffs. So, good reason why he won. And in the National League, this was pretty much a foregone conclusion. Joe Maddon of the Chicago Cubs takes home the Manager of the Year there. So, Joe Maddon taking the Cubs to their first playoff appearance in a while with a bunch of youngsters. The bright future ahead of the Chicago team in the North Side. So, but in 2015 it was also deserved. But we can only see what happens we can only wait and see what happens going forward. For Rookie of the Year, again, I think I was on point with this. In the American League, it was Carlos Correa, shortstop of the Astros. National League, it was Chris Bryant, again of the Cubs. Again, they have a young team, young, good team. So things are looking good for them. But the Astros are seemingly sweeping some awards too. For Cy Young, Dallas Keuchel, like I mentioned way long ago, he took home the American League Cy Young Award. And Jake Arrieta, again, Chicago Cubs, took home the National League Cy Young. And as I mentioned earlier, the MVP awards is what's being announced later on today. The finalists for both awards, like I've mentioned before, well, I don't think I mentioned the finalists, but the two guys who I think would win both leagues are in those finals. So Josh Donaldson in the American League and Bryce Harper in the National League. So you'll probably see me posting it on Facebook after I post this podcast, but again, it's Donaldson and it's going to be Harper. The American League, it's either Lorenzo Cain, Donaldson, or Mike Trout. Mike Trout has a decent chance. He's probably the best player of the last 5 years, but Donaldson, I think he had a better year. And in the National League, it's Paul Goldschmidt, Harper, and Joey Votto. Both Votto and Goldschmidt had super seasons as well, but neither one of them touched the candle to Bryce. So, but after today, there's nothing. Baseball is over. Fortunately, there's still the off season, the hot stove. So, I'm not going to completely ignore baseball, mostly because it's part of the podcast name. But there's still activity to be talked about. So, hot stove is coming around, and the hot stove is basically the time of the year where free agents are signed, players get traded, that sort of thing. As for the White Sox, they have a lot to take care of. The offense sucks beyond belief. Pitching is on a scale of 1 to 10, they're about a 7.5, and that's even after Samardzija signs elsewhere. He's been offered the qualified offer and denied it, so see what happens there. But the offense sucks. There's Jose Abreu, and then there's Adam Eaton, and then there's nothing. There's role players, there's somewhat decent players, there's players who are due to turn around for 2016, but there's really not a whole lot to be psyched about. If you look at the young guys, the middle infield super quote-unquote stars like Saladino and Sanchez, and they're just not going to cut it. I've said it before, and I'll keep on saying it. They'll be, I guess, fine to at least earn some playing time, but they're not going to be the ones to lead the team to the World Series. So it's going to have to be some trades. Going to have to be some big signings. We do have a quote unquote excess of pitching, so hopefully we can leverage some of that for better players in the field, because that's what the team needs. If they want to compete, then that's what they got to do. All right, that does it for episode number 28 of the Baseball and Beer podcast. Again, if you ever wanted to reach out to me, here are the following ways to do so. On Twitter, it is at BaseballBeerPod, Facebook.com/BaseballBeerPod. If you want to send me an email, baseballbeerpodcast@gmail.com. Finally, the website, which you can find the podcast if you want to download it from there directly, baseballandbeerpodcast.blogspot.com. Also found on iTunes and Twitter. iTunes and Stitcher. I'm sorry. Again, this is the Baseball and Beer podcast. I was your host, Brendan Bowes. I hope everyone has a fantastic weekend and enjoy whatever.
Are you excited?
I'm so excited.
Awesome.
I do not like Julia Roberts movies.